Chapter 6 Christmas Ribbon. "The joke's on me," said Louis Wu. "Now I know where to find the puppeteer world." "Very nice, Nessus. You kept your promise."
"I told you that you would find the information more surprising than useful."
"A good joke," said the Kazin. "Your sense of humor surprises me, Nessus." Below, a tiny eel-shaped island surrounded by a black sea. The island rose like a fire salamander, and Louis thought he could pick out tall, slender buildings. Obviously, aliens would not be trusted on the mainland.
"We do not joke," said Nessus. "My species has no sense of humor."
"Strange. I would have thought that humor was an aspect of intelligence."
"No, humor is associated with an interrupted defense mechanism."
"All the same."
"Speaker, no sapient being ever interrupts a defense mechanism."
As the ship dropped, the lights resolved. Sun panels along street levels, windows in buildings, light sources in park-like areas. In a last instant, Louis glimpsed buildings slender as rapier blades, miles tall. Then the city flashed up to engulf them, and they were down. Down in a parkland of colorful alien planets. Nobody moved. Puppeteers were the second most harmless-looking sentience in known space. They were too small, too shy, too weird to seem dangerous. They were merely funny. But suddenly Nessus was a member of his species, and his species was mightier than men had dreamed. The mad puppeteer sat quite still, his neck bobbing to observe his chosen underlings. There was nothing funny about Nessus. His race moved worlds, 5 at a time. So that Tila's giggle was a shocking sound.
"I was just thinking," she explained. "The only way to keep from having too many little puppeteers is no sex at all, right, Nessus?" "Yes." She giggled again. "No wonder puppeteers don't have a sense of humor."
Through a park that was too regular, too symmetrical, too well-tamed, they followed a floating blue light. The air was thick with the spicy chemical smell of puppeteer. That smell was everywhere. It had been strong and artificial in the one-room life support system of the transfer ship. It had not diminished when the airlock opened. 1 trillion puppeteers had flavored the air of this world, and for all of eternity it would smell of puppeteer. Nessus danced. His small clawed hooves seemed barely to touch the resilient surface of the walk. The Kazin glided, cat-like, his naked pink tail whipping rhythmically back and forth. The sound of the puppeteer's walk was a tap dance in 3/4 time. From the Kazin came not the slightest whisper of motion. Tila's walk was almost silent. Her walk always looked clumsy, but it wasn't. She never stumbled, never bumped anything. Louis, then, was the least graceful of the 4. But why should Louis Wu be graceful? An altered ape, whom evolution had never entirely adapted to walking on flat ground. For millions of years his fathers had walked on all 4s where they had used the trees where they could. The Pliocene had ended that with millions of years of drought. The forests had left Louis Wu's ancestors behind, high and dry and starving. In desperation they had eaten meat. They had done better after learning the secret of the antelope's thigh bone, whose double-knobbed shoulder joint had left its mark in so many fossil skulls. Now, on feet still equipped with vestigial fingers, Louis Wu and Dela Brown walked with aliens. Aliens. They were all aliens here, even mad exiled Nessus. With his brown and unkempt mane and his restless searching heads. Speaker, too, was uneasy. His eyes, within their black spectacle markings, searched the alien vegetation for things with poison stings or razor teeth. Instinct, probably. Puppeteers would not permit dangerous beasts in their parks. They came upon a dome that glowed like a huge half-buried pearl. There the floating light split in two. "I must leave you," said Nessus, and Lewis saw that the puppeteer was terrified. "I go to confront those who lead." He spoke low and urgently. "Speaker, tell me quickly, should I not return, would you seek me out to slay me for the insult I delivered in Krushenko's restaurant?" "Is there risk that you will not return?"
"Some risk. Those who lead may dislike what I must tell them. I ask again, would you hunt me down?"
"Here, on an alien world, amid beings of such awesome power and such lack of faith in a Kazin's peaceful intent." The Kazin's tail lashed once emphatically. "No, but neither would I continue with the expedition."
"That will be sufficient."
Nessus trottled off, trembling visibly, following the guide light.
"What's he scared of?"
Tila complained.
"He's done everything they told him to. Why would they be angry with him?"
"I think he's up to something," said Lewis. "Something devious. But what?" The blue light moved on. They followed it into an iridescent hemisphere. Now the dome had vanished. From a triangle of couches, two humans and a Kazin looked out into a tame jungle of brilliant alien plants, watching the approach of a strange puppeteer. Either the dome itself was invisible from inside, or the park scene was a projection. The air smelled of many puppeteers. The strange puppeteer pushed its way through a last fringe of hanging scarlet tendrils. Lewis remembered when he had thought of Nessus as it. When had Nessus graduated to him? But Speaker, a familiar alien, had been him from the beginning. The puppeteer stopped there, just short of the presumed boundaries of the pearly dome. Its mane was silver where Nessus's was brown, and was neatly coiffured in complex ringlets. But its voice was Nessus's thrilling contralto.
"I must apologize for not being present to greet you. You may address me as Chiron."
A projection, then. Lewis and Tila murmured polite demurrers. Speaker to animals bared his teeth.
"The one you call Nessus knows all that you are about to learn. His presence was required elsewhere. However, he mentioned your reactions on learning of our engineering skills."
Lewis winced. The puppeteer continued.
"This may be fortunate. You will understand the better when you learn of our own reactions to a more ambitious work of engineering."
Half the dome went black. Annoyingly, it was the side of the dome opposite to the projected puppeteer. Lewis found a control to turn his couch, but he reflected that he would have needed two swiveled heads, with independently operating eyes to watch both halves of the dome at once. The darkened side showed starry space forming a backdrop for a small, blazing disk. A ringed disk. The scene was a blow-up of the hollow in Lewis Wu's pocket. The light source was small and brilliant white, very like a view of Sol, as seen from the general neighborhood of Jupiter. The ring was huge in diameter, wide enough to stretch half across the darkened side of the dome, but it was narrow, not much thicker than the light source at its axis. The near side was black, and, where it cut across the light, sharp-edged. Its further side was a pale blue ribbon across space. If Louis Wu was growing used to miracles, he was not yet so blasé as to make idiotic-sounding guesses. Instead, he said, "It looks like a star with a ring around it. What is it?" Chiron's reply came as no surprise.
"It is a star with a ring around it," said the puppeteer. "A ring of solid matter. An artifact."
Dealah Brown clapped her hands and burst into giggles. She strangled the giggles after a few moments and managed to look wonderfully solemn, but her eyes glowed. Louis understood perfectly. He felt a touch of the same joy. The ringed sun was his or her private toy, a new thing in a mundane universe. Take Christmas ribbon, pale blue and an inch wide, the kind you use to wrap presents. Set a lighted candle on a bare floor. Take 50 feet of ribbon and string it in a circle with the candle at the center, balancing the ribbon on edge so that the inner circle catches the candlelight. But the Kazin's tail was lashing back and forth, back and forth. After all, it wasn't a candle in the middle. That was a sun.
"By now you know," said Chiron, "that we have been moving north along the galactic axis for the past 204 of your Earth years. In Kazin years,
217.
Yes. During that time, we have naturally observed the space ahead of us for signs of danger and the unexpected. We had known that the star EC1752 was ringed with an uncharacteristically dense and narrow band of dark matter. It was assumed that the ring was dust or rock, yet it was surprisingly regular. Some 90 days ago, our fleet of worlds reached a position such that the ring occluded the star itself. We saw that the ring was sharply bounded. Further investigation revealed that the ring is not gas nor dust, nor even asteroidal rock, but a solid band of considerable tensile strength. Naturally, we were terrified.
Speaker to Animals asked, "How were you able to deduce its tensile strength?"
Spectroanalysis and frequency shifts gave us a relative difference in velocities. The ring is clearly rotating about its primary at 770 miles per second, a velocity high enough to compensate for the pull of gravity from the primary, and to provide an additional centripetal acceleration of 9.94 meters per second. Consider the tensile strength needed to prevent the structure from disintegrating under such a pull.
"Gravity," said Louis.
"Apparently."
"Gravity. A touch less than Earth's. There's somebody living there on the inner surface." "Oh," said Louis Wu, for the full impact was beginning to hit him, and the little hairs were rising along his spinal column. He heard the swish, swish of the Kazin's tail cutting air. It was not the first time men had met their superiors. Thus far, men had been lucky. Abruptly, Louis stood up and walked towards the dome wall. It didn't work. The ring and the star receded before him until he touched a smooth surface. But he saw something he hadn't noticed before. The ring was checkered. There were regular rectangular shadows along its blue back. "Can you give us a better picture?"
"We can explain it,"
said the contralto voice. The G2 star jerked forward, then shot blazing off to the right, so that Louis was looking down on the lighted inner surface of the ring. Blurred as it was, Louis could only guess that the brighter, whiter areas must be cloud, that regions of faintly deeper blue might be land, where lighter blue was sea. But the shadowed areas were quite visible. The ring seemed to be laid out in rectangles. A long strip of glowing baby blue, followed by a shorter strip of deep navy blue, followed by another long strip of light blue, dots and dashes. Something's causing those shadows, he said. Something in orbit.
Yes, just that. 20 rectangular shapes orbit in a Kepler rosette much nearer the primary. We do not know their purpose.
You wouldn't. It's been too long since you had a sun. These orbiting rectangles must be there to separate night from day. Otherwise it would be always high noon on the ring.
You will understand now why we called for your help. Your alien insights were bound to be of value.
Uh-huh. How big is the ring? Have you studied it much? Have you sent probes?
We have studied the ring as best we could, without slowing our velocity, and without otherwise attracting notice to ourselves. We have sent no probes, of course. Since they would have to be remotely controlled by hyperwave, such probes might be traced back to us.
You can't track a hyperwave signal. It's theoretically impossible.
Perhaps those who built the ring have evolved different theories. But we have studied the ring with other instruments.
As Chiron spoke, the scene on the dome wall changed to blacks and whites and grays. Outlines shifted and wavered.
We have taken photographs and holographs in all electromagnetic frequencies. If you are interested in...
They don't show much detail.
No, the light is too much bent by gravitational fields and solar wind and intervening dust and gases. Our telescopes cannot find further detail.
So you haven't really learned much.
I would say we have learned a good deal. One puzzling point. The ring apparently stops on the close order of 40% of neutrinos.
Tila merely looked bewildered, but Speaker made a startled sound, and Lewis whistled, very low. That eliminated everything. Normal matter, even the terrifically compressed matter in the heart of a star, would stop almost no neutrinos. Any neutrino stood a 50-50 chance of getting through several light-years thickness of lead. An object in a slave or stasis field reflected all neutrinos. So did a general product's hull. But nothing known would stop 40% of neutrinos and let the rest through. Something new then, said Lewis. Chiron, how big is this ring? How massive is it?
The ring masses 2 times 10 to the 30th power in grams, measures 0.95 times 10 to the 8th power miles in radius, and something less than 10 to the 6th power miles across.
Lewis was not comfortable thinking in abstract powers of 10. He tried to translate the numbers into pictures. He had been right to think of inch-wide Christmas ribbon balanced on edge and strung in a loop. The ring was more than 90 million miles in radius, about 600 million miles long, he estimated, but less than 1 million miles across edge to edge. It massed a little more than the planet Jupiter. Somehow that doesn't seem massive enough, he said. Something that big should weigh as much as a good-sized sun. The Kazin agreed. One has the ludicrous picture of billions of beings trying to live on a construct no thicker than book film.
Your intuition is wrong, said the puppeteer with silver curls. Consider the dimensions. If the ring were a ribbon of hull metal, for example, it would be approximately 50 feet thick.
50 feet. That would be hard to believe. But Tila's eyes had been turned to the ceiling, and her lips had been moving silently but rapidly.
He's right, she said. The math works out. But what's it for? Why would anyone build such a thing?
Room.
Room.
Room to live, Lewis amplified. That's what it's all about. 600 trillion square miles of surface area is 3 million times the surface area of the Earth. It'd be like having 3 million worlds all mapped flat and joined edge to edge. 3 million worlds within air car distance. That'd solve any population problem. And what a problem they must have had. You don't go into a project like that one just for kicks. A point, said the Kazin. Chiron, have you searched neighboring stars for other similar rings?
Yes,
And found none, as I thought. If the race that built the ring had known of faster-than-light travel, they would have settled other stars. They would not have needed the ring. Therefore, there is only one ring.
Yes.
I am reassured. We are superior to the ring makers in at least one aspect. The Kazin stood suddenly. Are we to explore the habitable surface of the ring?
A physical landing might prove to be over-ambitious.
Nonsense. We must inspect the vehicle you have prepared for us. Is its landing gear sufficiently versatile? When may we depart? Chiron whistled, a startled burst of discord.
You must be mad. Consider the power of those who built this ring. They make my civilization seem savages.
Or cowards.
Very well. You may go to inspect your craft when the one you call Nessus returns. For the time previous to that event, there are more data regarding the ring.
You try my patience, said Speaker, but he sat down. You liar, thought Lewis. You fake it well, and I'm proud of you. His own stomach was queasy as he returned to his couch. A baby blue ribbon stretched across the stars, and man had met superior beings. Again. The Gazinti had been first. When man first used fusion drives to cross the gaps between the stars, the Gazinti were already using the gravity polarizer to power their interstellar warships. It made their ships faster and more maneuverable than human ships. Man's resistance to the Gazinti fleet would have been normal had it not been for the Gazinti lesson. A reaction drive is a weapon, devastating in direct proportion to its efficiency as a drive. Their first foray into human space had been a terrific shock to the Gazinti. Human society had been peaceful for centuries, for so long that they had virtually forgotten war. But human interstellar ships used fusion-powered photon drives, launched by a combination of photon sail and asteroid-based laser cannon. So the Gazinti telepaths continued to report that the human worlds had no weapons at all, while giant laser cannon chopped at the Gazinti ships and smaller mobile cannon darted in and out of the light pressure of their own beams. Slowed by unexpected human resistance and by the barrier of light speed, the war had run for decades instead of years, but the Gazinti would have won eventually. Except that an outsider ship had stumbled across the small human colony on We Made It. They had sold the mayor the secret of the outsider hyperdrive shunt on credit. We Made It had not known of the Gazinti war, but they learned of it fast enough when they built a few faster-than-light ships. Against hyperdrive, the Gazinti hadn't a prayer. Later, the puppeteers had come to set up trading posts in human space. Man had been very lucky. 3 times he had met races technologically superior to him. The Gazinti would have crushed him without the outsider hyperdrive. The outsiders, again, were clearly superiors, but they wanted nothing that man could give them, except supply bases and information, and these they could buy. In any case, the outsiders, fragile beings of helium-2 metabolism, were too vulnerable to heat and gravity to make good warriors. And the puppeteers, powerful beyond dreams, were too cowardly. Who had built the Ringworld, and were they warriors? Months later, Lewis was to see Speaker's lie as his personal turning point. He might have backed out then, on Tila's behalf, of course. The Ringworld was terrifying enough as an abstraction in numbers. To think of approaching it in a spacecraft, of landing on it. But Lewis had seen the Kazin in terror of the puppeteer's flying worlds. Speaker's lie was a magnificent act of courage. Could Lewis show himself a coward now? He sat down and turned to face the glowing projection, and as his eyes brushed Tila, he silently cursed her for an idiot. Her face was alive with wonder and delight. She was as eager as the Kazin pretended to be. Was she too stupid to be afraid? There was an atmosphere on the ring's inner side. Spectroanalysis showed the air to be as thick as Earth's, and of approximately the same composition. Definitely breathable to man and Kazin and puppeteer. What kept it from blowing away was a thing to be guessed at. They would have to go and look. In the system of the G2 sun, there was nothing at all but the ring itself. No planets, no asteroids, no comets. They cleaned it out, said Lewis. They didn't want anything to hit the ring.
Naturally, said the puppeteer with silver curls. If something did strike the ring, it would strike at a minimum of 770 miles per second, the speed of rotation of the ring itself. No matter how strong the material of the ring, there would always be the danger of an object missing the outer surface and crossing the sun to strike the unprotected, inhabited inner surface. The sun itself was a yellow dwarf, somewhat cooler than Sol, and a touch smaller.
We will need heat suits on the ring, said the Kazin. Rubbing it in, Lewis thought.
No,
said Chiron.
The temperature of the inner surface is quite tolerable to all of our species.
How would you know that?
The frequency of the infrared radiation emitted by the outer surface.
You see me exposed as a fool.
Not at all. We have been studying the ring since its discovery, while you have had a few eighths of minutes. The infrared frequency indicates an average temperature of 290 degrees absolute, which of course applies to the inner as well as the outer surface of the ring. For you, this will be some 10 degrees warmer than optimum, speaker to animals. For Lewis and Tila, it is optimum. Do not let our attention to details mislead or frighten you, Chiron added. We would not permit a landing unless the ring engineers themselves insisted. We merely wish you to be ready for any eventuality.
You don't have any detail of surface formations.
Unfortunately, no. The resolving power of our instruments is insufficient. We can do some guessing, said Tila. The 30-hour day-night cycle, for instance. Their original world must have turned that fast. Do you suppose that's their original system? We assume that it is, since they apparently did not have hyperdrive, said Chiron. But presumably they would have moved their world to another system, using our own techniques.
And should have, the Kazin rumbled, rather than destroy their own system in the course of building their ring. I think we will find their own system somewhere nearby. As denuded of worlds as this one, they would have used terraforming techniques to settle all of the worlds of their own system before adapting this more desperate expedient.
Tila said, Desperate?
Then, when they had finished building their ring around the sun, they would have been forced to move all their worlds into this system to transfer their populations. Maybe not, said Lewis. They might have used big SDL ships to settle their ring if it was close enough to their own system.
Why desperate?
They looked at her.
I would have thought they built the ring for,
Tila floundered.
because they wanted to.
For kicks, for scenery, Finnegal's fist, Tila. Think of the resources they'd have to divert. Remember, they must have had a hell of a population problem. By the time they needed the ring for living room, they probably couldn't afford to build it. They built it anyway because they needed it. Said Tila, looking puzzled.
Nessus returns,
said Chiron. Without another word, the puppeteer turned and trotted away into the park.